purpose of this tutorial is to become familiar with the components of the SPSS for Windows software. While this tutorial will present an overview of the program, issues related to specific analyses will be discussed in the later videos. The starting point for this video will be the identification of the three major components or windows of the SPSS program. These components include the data editor, output window, and syntax window. Because the syntax window is not available in the student version of SPSS, we will focus on the data editor and output window. Let's begin by looking at the process for opening the software. During the installation process, we are typically given the option of placing an icon on the desktop. If you choose this option, the software can be started by double-clicking on the desktop icon. If the icon was not created, you can open the software by using the Start menu. Simply click on Start, then select All Programs, and locate the SPSS for Windows folder. Once you have located the folder, select SPSS for Windows Student Version. By default, the software provides a wizard that allows you to choose the function you wish to complete, such as opening an existing file or entering new data. Many users disable this wizard since all of the options can be accomplished from within the software. When you open the SPSS program, the first window that appears is the data editor. This window looks like most spreadsheet programs and is where we will enter the data to be analyzed. There are three areas of this window with which we will want to become familiar. Let's begin with the largest portion of the window, which resembles a traditional spreadsheet program. This is the area in which all data will be entered. While different analyses require slightly different formats for entering the data, there are two constants to remember. First, rows are used to represent subjects or units, and second, columns are used to represent variables. To illustrate these constants, suppose we have administered a survey consisting of 3 questions, requiring the individual's name, their gender, and a test score. As we receive our surveys and begin entering data into our spreadsheet, we will typically enter all of the information from the first survey before proceeding to the next. Additionally, it is common practice with surveys to assign a number. To keep our illustration simple, we can number them as they are received, beginning with the number 1. Once we receive our first survey and have it numbered, we can begin the process of entering the data. First, we will enter the number of the survey. Since the row represents the survey, all of the information from this first survey must be contained within the first row. Furthermore, because we asked for 3 pieces of information, we will have 3 additional columns in our data set, one containing the name, one containing gender information, and one containing the test score information. So, the data from our first survey might look something like this. We can repeat this process for the remaining surveys. After we have entered several surveys, notice how the 2 constants about data entry have allowed us to have well-organized data. For example, if we want to know what the responses were for a specific individual, we can locate the name or survey number and look within that row for their responses. Conversely, if we are only interested in information regarding the test score of the respondents, we can look in the last column. At this point, you may have noticed some odd names at the top of the columns. These are the default names that SPSS assigns to the variables, in this case the items from our survey, and brings us to the second area of the data editor with which we must be familiar. At the bottom of the window, we find 2 tabs. The first is labeled Data View and is the view that is currently being displayed. The second tab is labeled Variable View. If we select the Variable View tab, we will see another page that resembles a spreadsheet. However, we cannot enter any data in this view. This view will allow us to see a list of the columns that are currently being used in the data editor, beginning with their survey number. For the purpose of this class, we can leave the default names. However, to avoid any confusion, it might be helpful to provide more descriptive names. For example, we know that the first column in our data contained the number of the survey, so we might want to change the name of the first variable from VAR0001 to something more appropriate. At this point, I would like to point out some guidelines for naming variables. In earlier versions of SPSS, variable names were limited to 8 characters, spaces, and other special characters such as dashes, etc. could not be used, and the name had to begin with a letter. While some of these restrictions no longer exist, particularly the 8-character limitation, I usually recommend using the old guidelines, since this file may eventually be sent to someone with an older version or exported to a format that only allows the use of 8 characters. So, if we want to name our first variable using these guidelines, we could use a name such as SURV with an underline NUM. We can name the remaining columns name, gender, and test for our test score. Now, as we look across the columns to see the other options, you might notice that the variable types listed in the second column are different from the name and gender variables. When a variable is identified as a string, the system has identified that data as being in text format. For our current discussion, we do not have to change this value, but the difference between a string and numeric type of variable will be important in later analyses and will be discussed in more detail at that time. At this point in our overview, the only other piece of information that would be helpful is the label. Remember that we chose to use the short 8-character name for the variable. The label option allows us to enter a longer, more descriptive label that will appear in our output. For example, we named the last variable test. For the label, we could use test score on the statistics anxiety survey. Once we have changed the names of the variables and assigned any desired labels, we can return to the data view by clicking the tab at the bottom of the page. Notice that the names at the top of our columns have changed from the VAR format to the names that we specified. Having begun our data entry and made any desired changes to the variable names and labels, we can now focus on the final area of the data editor. This area is at the top of the window and includes the menus and toolbar. Like most Windows programs, when you click on a menu name, a drop-down menu appears. We will look at specific menus and options in later videos. However, the two most common menus for this class are File and Analyze. As you can see, the File menu contains the commands that are common to most programs, including the most important commands, Save and Save As, since it is a wise practice to save your data often, especially when working with large data sets or data sets that require a large amount of cleaning and manipulation. The Analyze menu contains the list of analyses available in the SPSS program and will be explored in more detail as each analysis is discussed. Just below the menus is the toolbar, which contains shortcuts to some of the most commonly used functions found in the menus. For example, there are the traditional Open, Save, and Print icons, but there are also shortcuts to functions that are specific to the SPSS program. Now that we have entered our data, we are ready to run the desired analysis. We will discuss the procedures for conducting specific analyses in later videos. However, we can examine the second component of the SPSS program, which is the output window. This window will contain the results of the analysis or analyses that we request. Like the data editor, the output window consists of three main areas. The first thing that you will notice about the output window is that it appears to be divided into two frames, and we will begin our discussion with the larger of the two frames on the right-hand side. This side of the window will contain the actual results from the analysis or analyses that were requested. For this illustration, we will use the data that was used for the data editor discussion. As we can see, a simple frequency count was conducted and the results appear in the right side window. If we take a closer look at the results, we see a couple of tables. Above each table appears the name of the variable that was analyzed. In this illustration, it was VAR 00004 because it was conducted before the name was changed and the label assigned. At this point, we can look at the left side of the window. This side of the window will contain a log of the analyses that were conducted. From the information in the window, we can see that the frequencies analysis was conducted 3 times. In order to locate the desired set of results, we could simply scroll through the results in the right-hand window. Or we can simply click on the desired analysis in the left-hand window, and they will be displayed in the right-hand window. When we only run one analysis, this log does not provide much information, unless it is a very intensive analysis that provides lengthy output. However, if we have conducted several analyses, it allows us to easily locate the desired results without scrolling through the entire output. In the previous discussion regarding the data editor, we looked at changing names and assigning variables. Now that we are working with the output window, we can see some of the other implications of changing names and assigning labels. In the first reference to the output, no names were changed or labels assigned. Consequently, the default VAR format was used to identify the labels. If we look at the second analysis, by clicking in the log on the left, we can see that the VAR format is gone and has been replaced by the name, in this case, test. Finally, if we look at the last analysis, not only is the VAR format no longer used, the test name has been replaced by the label that was used, specifically score on the Statistics Anxiety Survey. Like the data editor, the final area of the output window contains the menus and toolbars. The File menu, along with the Save and Print icons in the toolbar, will be the main functions used while in the output window. Before we conclude this overview, we need to talk for a moment about saving information from the SPSS program. Because the SPSS package consists of multiple components or windows, specifically the data editor, the output window, and for the full versions, the syntax window, when saving files from the SPSS software, it is important to remember that each of these components has a unique file type and must be saved individually. Because the student version of SPSS does not contain the syntax component, we will focus on saving our data and output information. When saving information from SPSS, only the information in the active window is saved. For example, if the currently displayed or active window contains the output from our analysis, the only information that will be contained in the resulting file is the output. The information from the data editor will not be saved. In order to make sure that all of the necessary information is saved, it is recommended that a standard procedure for saving files is developed. For class purposes, the first step in our process should be the creation of a directory where all of our files will be saved. This can be accomplished before you begin using the software through My Computer. Because we will usually begin by working with the data editor, this information will usually be saved first. To save information from the data editor, we should complete the entering of our data, or if we have a large amount of data to be entered, we can save our information before it is completed, similar to saving a paper as we work on it. Once we have reached a point where we want to save our data, we can select Save or Save As from the File menu. If we are saving the data for the first time, a dialog box will appear that will allow us to enter the desired name of the file. Additionally, we can select the location of the file to be saved. If a class folder has not already been created, it can be created now by selecting the New Folder icon. Before we finish saving our data, we should notice that the file type that is identified for the data file is .sav. This file type will be different when we save our output information. Once we have identified the name and location for saving the file, we can simply hit Save and will be returned to the data editor. The final step in our procedure for saving SPSS files will involve saving the output from our analysis. The procedure for saving the information from the output window is identical to that for saving the data files. However, we must remember that the output window must be the currently displayed or active window. If we are uncertain whether the output window is the active window, we can select Window and Output 1. Likewise, we can use this menu to switch back and forth between the data editor and the output window. After making sure that the output window is the active window, its contents can be saved by selecting File and Save or Save As. As with the data editor, if we are saving the output information for the first time, the Save dialog box will appear. At this point, the procedure is the same as that described for the data file. Name the file and specify the location. Once these two pieces of information have been entered, we can click Save. However, at this point, we should also notice that the file type identified for our output has a .spo ending. Remembering the difference between the data file ending and the output file ending will assist us in locating files through My Computer or Windows Explorer. By following this procedure, we will make sure that all of the necessary information regarding our analyses has been saved. If the contents of the data editor were not saved prior to running the analysis, the data editor window can be made the active window by selecting Window and SPSS Data Editor. This concludes our overview of the SPSS program.